Hello, I'm Megan Nolan, and I'm a writer from Waterford. I recently published my first novel, Acts of Desperation, during COVID. Obviously, uh, we had completed the first draft of the novel before lockdown began in March last year, but all the editing process, all the publicity took place during lockdowns and during COVID, obviously. So I'm going to just talk to you a little bit today about resurgence for writers, things that have come up in the last year that have been inspirations to us to keep going, to find new ways to work, and what we might take forward into the future. Um, it's an interesting area because for a writer like me, you work at home anyway, but this year has really brought it home how vast our networks are, how much we really need each other, and all the many people that go into producing a book or an essay or an article, and all the ways that we've had to find to be together this year. So on that note, the first of my 5 points is alone together, using remote working for community building. So obviously we've all had to use Zoom and online programs to connect this year for meetings and for roundtable discussions, for events. But one thing I wanted to bring up was the idea of co-working remotely without a defined purpose. So a friend of mine who's an artist has started this Friday afternoon session where herself and a bunch of invited friends, including myself, drop in and do 2.5 hours on Zoom where we're all creating something, mostly because they're visual artists, they're drawing and painting. And we just do that together for 2.5 hours. There's no speaking, there's a little introduction, and the artist who leads the session will choose a playlist and maybe introduce the playlist or do a little reading of a poem to set the tone, or just to say hello to everyone and welcome them. And then for those 2.5 hours, we just work side by side in a way, remotely, but without any defined outcome. And I found that really important, really instrumental to try and keep a sense that not only do we meet to try and create productive outcomes, which we also have to do, of course, but we also can meet remotely to try and give some ambient company to each other as we work. Because that's one thing that, as a freelancer, I do really miss, is to be in a cafe or to be in a library and you're working near other people but not with other people. So I thought that was a really interesting approach to try and curb some of the loneliness that is going to be a part of artists' lives for the next while, where we don't even, in what is already a pretty lonely profession, we don't have even the balm of going to a cafe and working next to our friends or just working near other strangers. So I do recommend thinking about some innovative way that you could work with people without it being to do with a direct outcome. The second thing I wanted to talk about, my second point, is innovating the reading experience, book bouquets and collaborations. So this is something I've noticed in the last while, is that bookshops and booksellers have become really creative in the last year. Because they can't provide the full bookshop experience at the moment, they've come into doing things that are more curated for the receiver, which are more intimate than just ordering a book. So while it might be useful for some people to use the bigger online retailers because of course they are cheaper, for anyone who can afford it, of course it's better to go independent and local. And I've noted that in London, and I've seen it in Waterford as well, the book centre have done this a lot, is offering tailored packages, so where you have a book and some chocolates or flowers or whatever it is with it. Or what I find really interesting and attractive is the idea of these book bouquets, where it's a handful of books by different authors put together and sort of collated for the reader's particular enjoyment. So like if you enjoy one author, you may enjoy these three others as well, and receiving those as a package. And I thought that I've really admired that over the past year, watching retailers create these really special experiences for the reader that maybe didn't massively exist before because readers could just go and browse and pick what they wanted. And I think that's something that we should continue with after COVID, because people who work in books and who are experienced booksiders are often, of course, the best people to recommend things and to put them together for a curious reader. The third thing I wanted to talk about, the third point of Resurgence, was taking advantage of international opportunities. Obviously, it wasn't with our consent or our desire that this year everything has been online, but I think it's important to take away the positives as well as the negatives from what has happened. And one positive for me is that there are no barriers in terms of organising international events with authors who are on different timelines and who would never have otherwise been able to join us in conversations. Um, so, for instance, when my book came out, Lauren Euler is an author and critic in New York, and she was able to interview me for one of the launch events. And that ended up being a really interesting experience and a really good encounter for both of us. And it would never have taken place if we weren't open to doing these online events. And even though they were possible before COVID, they weren't. There was no real uptake with this kind of thing. And I think it's something that we shouldn't totally abandon once we get back to normal life. Because the opportunities for collaboration and encounters with international peers of ours is such a great resource, and I don't want to lose that once things do return to normal. Um, and especially because if we're only ever encountering other artists in our direct communities just because of the practicalities of organizing events. So if I only end up seeing the same authors who live in my neighborhood here in London, and I don't encounter conversations with people who live all over the world and are of all different communities and different demographics as well, because often people with demanding jobs outside of their writing or art, such as caring responsibilities, or because they have young children or whatever it may be, can't make it out to an evening event all the time. To travel across London from a suburb to the centre is not feasible for lots of people. So I think that we're missing out on a lot by not encouraging those links to continue. We would be missing out on a lot. So I think that is something I'm desperate to keep is our openness to allowing those international opportunities to remain once things do return a bit more to normal. The fourth point I wanted to bring up is related to the last, which is to continue to consider inclusivity. So more directly than about international opportunities, I think it's very important that the last year there's many people who are disabled in some way or who have difficulties in experiencing live events and many other types of literary convention, and they've been able for the first time to actually participate and attend almost every event that they would like to. These accessibility issues can be to do with the most basic in terms of building structures and events taking place in buildings which don't have sufficient entrance and exit needs and space once inside. And there can also be more subtle things such as someone with anxiety or who is on the autistic spectrum who cannot handle confined busy spaces with people speaking at a relatively high volume constantly. And even I myself, I don't have a disability, but I have anxiety, and sometimes it's been really difficult for me to be in readings in person because you're in a very confined space. You can't leave easily without it being very embarrassing. And if someone's speaking about something that is triggering for your mental health and and which touches on something you've experienced personally, it's really difficult to leave that situation. So I think going forward to remember that we have created actually inadvertently a really healthy way for people to participate, people who should be able to participate in our communities, and we should not let them be excluded once this ends. And we must make sure to take what we've learned from this year into the future when we do have live events again, in terms of streaming, in terms of interpretation, sign language, having subtitles for those who are hard of hearing, all these things that make our communities much richer by involving everyone who wants to be in them. my final point then is just to remember, this is sort of a bit of an obvious point, but it's something that has helped me over the last year, which is to remember your great advantage as a writer, which is that you don't need anything outside yourself. Um, in very basic terms, if you've got a space that you can sit down and a pen and paper or a laptop, then you can do your job, and you may encounter difficulties with it, but you have the power to do your job, which many artists don't have. They need materials, they need certain spaces, and we're very lucky as writers that we do not need those things necessarily. And that's not to say we don't benefit from them and we don't like them, but we don't absolutely need them. And I found some power in that, in reminding myself of that over the past years, that you have everything you need inside of yourself and with very basic tools that are accessible to most people, and that we don't need a lot outside of that to create our work. And even though our communities have been hit this year by not being able to gather and exchange ideas freely in the way that we would like to, i.e., with social life involved in it, in terms of the work, we do have that power. And I would encourage you to remember that you've got the self definition that many other artists lack because of their material needs. Um, and yeah, I think that I'm very excited for literary community to begin again in a more concrete, physical way. But for the moment, you've got yourself, and we have these new avenues to be with each other and with others who were formerly excluded before this. So I think we're quite lucky as writers. And I'm really excited to hear what everyone else has to say about writing. Thank you so much.